So picture the oppressive, just suffocating heat of August 25th.
Oh, the hottest day of the year.
Literally the hottest. It's sitting at the tail end of this unusually brutal, stagnant summer that has just left London completely baked dry.
Right.
And we are in a wealthy, very secluded neighborhood in northwest London, right on the edge of Hampstead Heath.
It's the kind of street where the houses are, set back behind high walls and these heavy iron gates.
Exactly. So the police, they arrive at one of these houses just minutes after a frantic neighbor reports hearing the sharp, unmistakable crack of gunshots.
Yeah.
And the front door is just wide open, hanging loose on its hinges. But inside, the house is plunged into pitch black darkness.
None of the light switches work, right?
No, the power has been deliberately cut, so the officers have to draw their flashlights, and the heavy, stifling heat of the hallway is suddenly sliced by these intermittent, frantic beams of white light.
It's so cinematic, but in a horrifying way.
It really is. And in that flashing, strobe-like darkness, they find a woman. She is standing completely motionless by the fireplace.
Just frozen.
Yeah, and she's wearing a white dress that glows almost ghost-like when the flashlight beams hit it, but the fabric is heavily splashed with dark, wet red.
And there's the weapon.
Right, there is a large hunting knife resting on the floor at her feet, and she has fresh, deep, jagged cuts across both of her wrists.
The scene is frozen, almost like a macabre tableau.
Yeah.
And then the lead officer's flashlight beam sweeps across the room, cutting into the heavy shadows near the window.
And seated in a heavy wooden chair is her husband, Gabriel, or, well, what is left of him.
God.
He is bound tightly to the chair. Thick picture-hanging wire is wrapped viciously around his ankles and his wrists.
Cutting deep grooves into his skin, which tells us he struggled violently.
Right. His head is just lolling lazily to one side, and in the chaotic flashing light, the officers initially think he might just be unconscious from the trauma.
But then the beam settles on his face.
Yeah. The visceral devastation of the scene is revealed. He has been shot 5 times directly in the face.
The man's features are completely obliterated. It is a scene of absolute intimate annihilation.
It is. And the woman standing there in the white dress, Alicia Berenson, this brilliant and highly celebrated painter, she never speaks another word.
Not a single syllable.
Not to the armed police who tackle her to the ground to save her from bleeding out. Not to the frantic hospital staff trying to stabilize her vitals.
Not even to her defense lawyers.
No. And not to the judge who eventually sentences her to a secure psychiatric facility. From the exact moment the gun went off, she becomes a silent, impenetrable enigma.
She refuses to tell the world what happened in that room.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we aren't just looking at the blood on the floor.
No, we are performing a psychological autopsy on the minds that put it there.
Exactly. We have the complete case file. We are compiling for forensic evidence, falsified therapy notes, personal diary entries, and witness accounts.
We're going to decode the hidden, grotesque symbols buried in a mute artist's paintings.
And we are going to break down the neurological and, well, the psychological motives behind some truly disturbing acts of violence.
Right, and unpack the chilling deception of a mastermind who weaponized clinical authority just to hide his tracks in plain sight.
Because the physical murder of Gabriel Berenson is merely the final, inevitable symptom of a much deeper rot.
The silence Alicia adopts isn't just an absence of sound. It is a labyrinth of trauma, betrayal, and obsession. We are walking into a psychic crime scene today.
So consider this your warning as we open these files. Nothing you are about to hear is linear.
Not at all.
The clinical records have been tampered with, the narrators of these events are actively deceiving us, and the person holding the flashlight in the dark.
They might just be the one who severed the power lines in the first place.
Exactly. So let's step into the immediate aftermath. Alicia Berenson is found with the gun. Forensics confirm her fingerprints are the only ones on the weapon.
Right, and gunpowder residue is on her hands. The physical mechanics of the event are stark and undeniable.
But what she does after her discharge from the hospital, while she is under house arrest awaiting trial, it completely changes the trajectory of forensic psychology.
She refuses to speak, but she does not remain uncommunicative. She creates this massive painting.
And the speed of her creation defies her established behavioral baseline, doesn't it?
Completely. According to her gallery manager, Jean-Felix, Alicia historically agonized over her work.
Yeah, she would spend weeks, sometimes months, purely on composition, sketching, and color theory.
Every canvas was a slow, agonizing birth. But this post-murder painting, she produces it in a matter of days, working in a state of manic, obsessive focus.
It is a self-portrait. She paints herself standing in her studio, completely naked.
And her body is rendered in this unsparing, raw, almost clinical detail. You can see the faint blue veins pulsing under her translucent skin.
You can see the fresh, angry red scars heavily stitched on her wrists from her suicide attempt.
Yeah, she's holding a paintbrush that is heavily loaded, dripping red paint onto the floorboards.
But the focal point of the painting is what she is working on. In the portrait, the canvas on her easel is completely, utterly blank.
And her expression matches it. It is a void.
She titles the piece in the bottom left corner with a single Greek word, Alcestis.
That one word immediately elevates this from a grim domestic homicide into a mythological puzzle.
But before we get to the Greeks, I want to look at the mechanics of this silence. Because the media and the prosecution latched onto her mutism immediately.
Of course they did. They framed it as the stubborn, calculated refusal of a cold-blooded killer showing zero remorse.
But clinically speaking, what is actually happening in the brain when someone goes completely mute after a violent trauma?
Well, if we look at the neurobiology of severe trauma, profound mutism following a violent event isn't necessarily a choice.
Yeah.
It's actually a catastrophic systemic shutdown. When the human mind is confronted with an event that shatters its foundational understanding of reality.
An event it literally cannot process or integrate.
Exactly. The brain's architecture reorganizes to prioritize basic survival. The prefrontal cortex, which handles logic and complex thought, essentially goes offline.
Wow.
The Broca's area, the region of the brain responsible for speech production, can be completely suppressed by the amygdala's overwhelming panic response.
The clinical notes describe her as stuttering to a halt, like a broken car.
Yeah, think of an engine that has been flooded with too much fuel. It seizes up. The silence isn't a locked door keeping secrets in. It is the presence of an overwhelming, paralyzing shock.
Her verbal pathways are dead.
Right.
I mean, I understand the flooded engine analogy, but I have to push back on the idea that her cortex is completely offline.
Okay, why?
Look at the painting itself. She titled it. She carefully observed her own stitched wrists. She mixed the exact shade of red.
That's true.
Is it purely a symptom of a seized engine, or is it a highly tactical, aggressive act of withholding? Because withholding the narrative, especially when the entire country is begging you for it, is the ultimate power play.
It forces everyone else to do the work. Well, you are identifying a crucial tension in the pathology of borderline personality traits, which her medical records suggest she suffered from.
Right.
It isn't always a binary between an offline cortex and a calculated mastermind. Trauma can paralyze the vocal cords, while the subconscious mind simultaneously recognizes the power of the void.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But regardless of her conscious intent, you are absolutely right about the effect it had on the people around her. Nature abhors a vacuum.
And human psychology abhors an unexplained tragedy.
Exactly.
It's like her silence acts as a psychological black hole. It exerts this massive, invisible gravitational pull.
It traps her neighbor Barbie, her brother-in-law Max, Jean-Felix, and eventually the entire medical staff at the Grove Psychiatric Unit where she is institutionalized.
Because she gives them zero data, they are forced to project their own deepest fears, their own theories, and their own hidden guilts directly onto her blankness.
The public reaction perfectly illustrates this projection. When Jean-Felix makes the incredibly controversial and frankly exploitative decision to exhibit the Alcestis painting while Alicia is sitting in a psychiatric facility awaiting trial.
Oh, the reaction is pure, grotesque spectacle.
People are queuing up down the street past a neon-lit sex shop just to gawk at the canvas.
The atmosphere outside the gallery is described in the files as being like a rowdy crowd at a fairground waiting to enter a haunted house.
One witness account notes a woman in the gallery crowd staring at the blank expression in the painting and whispering, "Pure evil, cold-blooded bitch."
They look at a woman who just tried to slice her own wrists open, and they divine pure monstrosity. They label her a black widow.
If the creator won't provide the narrative, the mob will write one for her.
And this intense magnetic void is exactly what attracts the man who becomes dangerously obsessed with fixing her.
We need to examine the mind of the primary investigator of this case file.
Right, a criminal psychotherapist named Theo Faber. Because Theo doesn't just happen to catch Alicia's case, he actively manipulates his entire career path to get to her.
He leaves a prestigious, secure post at Broadmoor, one of the most high-profile psychiatric hospitals in the country.
To take a job at the Grove, which is a failing, underfunded psychiatric unit that is actively facing closure.
Specifically to gain access to Alicia Berenson.
And to understand why a trained medical professional would make such an irrational, obsessive career move, we have to analyze his psychological architecture.
In his own personal diaries, which he kept alongside his clinical logs, Theo admits an incredibly revealing truth.
He writes, "I became a psychotherapist because I was fucked up."
He confesses that his drive to enter the mental health field wasn't born out of pure altruism or scientific curiosity.
No. He was drawn to the profession because he is fundamentally damaged, and he was on a desperate lifelong quest to heal himself by proxy.
Which brings us to a foundational psychoanalytic concept that dominates Theo's files: the land before memory.
This is fascinating. As infants, we are entirely unformed. We don't have the neurological hardware to process terror, abandonment, or pain.
We are entirely dependent on our parents to act as emotional processors for us.
Exactly.
The psychoanalyst Wilfred Bion describes a primordial infant state called nameless dread.
Okay.
If an infant experiences terror, say they are hungry, cold, or frightened, they cannot contextualize it. They just feel an endless apocalyptic panic.
And a healthy parent acts as a container.
Yes. The parent takes in the infant's terror, processes it through their adult-developed brain, and feeds it back to the infant in a calm, manageable, soothing way.
They rock the child, they speak softly, they contain the dread.
But if the parent cannot or will not contain that terror, the infant internalizes that pure, unmitigated panic. It becomes the bedrock of their developing personality.
Think of it like a nuclear reactor. A healthy childhood provides you with cooling water.
Right.
When your emotions run hot, the water keeps the core from melting down. Theo's childhood was completely devoid of cooling water.
He grew up in an environment of arbitrary, explosive violence inflicted by a father he describes as entirely unhinged.
There is a deeply disturbing account in his diary of his father chasing him up the stairs, dragging him out from under a bed by his ankles.
And whipping him mercilessly with a belt while his mother stood by and did nothing.
There was no containment. The reactor was constantly melting down.
Because he was never contained as a child, Theo grows into an adult who requires constant external containment to survive his own mind.
He needs to self-medicate heavily with marijuana just to lower his baseline anxiety.
He clings to his own therapist, Ruth, like a life raft. And most dangerously, he develops a desperate, obsessive, almost pathetic devotion to his wife, Kathy.
Kathy becomes his ultimate emotional container. She is the vessel he uses to hold his fragile, fragmented sense of self together.
Which exposes a massive, glaring vulnerability in his clinical work.
Right, because in therapy, the patient delegates their unacceptable, horrific feelings to the therapist. The therapist has to be the container.
They hold the trauma, they feel it, and they slowly feed it back to the patient in a way the patient can survive.
But look at Theo. How can you contain the shattering trauma of a woman who shot her husband in the face when your own container is completely cracked?
When you are suffocating under your own uncontained dread, it makes you question the clinical validity of every note he ever wrote about her.
It creates a severe risk of countertransference and dangerous projection.
Absolutely. When Theo looks at Alicia Berenson, a woman locked in a secure ward, heavily medicated, branded a monster by the press, and completely isolated.
He doesn't view her through a lens of objective clinical empathy.
No. He experiences an uncanny, overwhelming identification. He looks into her silence and sees a dark, distorted reflection of his own unlovable, broken self.
He wants to drag her out of the dark because he desperately needs to prove that someone as broken as he is can actually be salvaged.
If he can fix her, maybe he isn't a lost cause.
The visual imagery he records in his diary to describe his own isolation is so chilling, and it perfectly maps onto Alicia.
He recalls a rare, heavy snowstorm from his childhood when his abusive father was out of town.
He and his mother go out into the garden and build a snowman, but unconsciously, they model the snowman after the father.
They give it a big, imposing belly and stern, angry twig eyebrows. And then they pelt it with snowballs.
Engaging in this brief, frantic moment of joyous rebellion against the effigy of their abuser.
But the truly revealing moment happens later that night. Theo sneaks out of his warm bed and walks out into the heavy blizzard.
He stands entirely alone in the freezing dark, holding his hands out, catching vanishing snowflakes on his fingertips until he is numb.
That image, a small boy standing in the freezing dark, seeking out the cold because it's the only environment he truly understands.
It perfectly encapsulates his internal baseline. Cold, isolated, and grasping at fragile, fleeting moments that vanish the second he touches them.
That frozen isolation is a direct psychological mirror to Alicia's icy, impenetrable silence at the Grove.
Imagine being that fragile. Imagine your entire sanity resting on the idea that your wife, Kathy, loves you and contains that coldness.
Now imagine what happens when the containment fails.
Theo is at home. He is smoking his secret stash of weed to numb his anxiety. He wanders into the study and casually taps the keyboard of Kathy's laptop, which she left open.
The screen wakes up, and right there, sitting in her inbox, is a chain of emails.
They are passionate, graphic, explicit emails between his beloved Kathy and another man.
She is having a prolonged, intense affair.
The physical reaction he records is instantaneous and violent. He drops to his knees on the floorboards and vomits.
It is a complete psychic collapse. The one container he had left, the one person whose love proved he had a right to exist, has entirely betrayed him.
The foundation of his sanity simply disintegrates. The reactor core melts down.
No, if you are reading the case file chronologically, you see Theo discovering his wife's infidelity, vomiting on the floor, and in the very next entry, he is walking the halls of the Grove, trying to unlock Alicia's mind.
They seem inextricably linked in time. He is a man drowning in his own betrayal, trying to save a woman drowning in hers.
He sits in the therapy room trying to coax words out of her, entirely unaware that she has already given him the answers.
She hasn't spoken them, she painted them.
Because if the Broca's area is shut down and verbal pathways are paralyzed, the brain's desperate need to process trauma doesn't just vanish.
No, it finds a neurological back door.
For a brilliant artist like Alicia, that back door is the canvas. Her art becomes her sworn testimony.
And to understand the truth of the crime scene, we have to decrypt the highly sophisticated codes she left behind.
Let's return to the Alcestis self-portrait. Why that specific title? Who is Alcestis?
So, to understand the painting, we have to look at the Greek tragedy by Euripides.
Right.
In the myth, King Admetus offends the gods and is fated to die. But the god Apollo owes him a favor, so he negotiates a loophole with death.
Admetus can live, provided he can find someone willing to go to the underworld and die in his place.
Exactly. So Admetus immediately goes to his elderly parents, assuming they have lived long enough and will gladly die for their son.
They refuse?
He asks his loyal friends. They refuse. Finally, his young, beautiful wife, Alcestis, steps forward.
She willingly agrees to sacrifice her own life so her husband can live.
She dies, and the hero, Heracles, who happens to be a guest in their home, feels indebted to Admetus's hospitality.
So Heracles journeys down into the underworld, physically wrestles with death itself, and drags Alcestis back to the land of the living.
He presents her to Admetus, fully restored. But there is a horrifying catch.
When Alcestis returns from the dead, she is profoundly changed. She refuses to speak a single word to her husband. She remains entirely, permanently mute.
Wait, think about the implications of that for a second. If Alicia paints herself as Alcestis immediately after the murder, the entire world assumes she is bragging.
They think she's casting herself as a cold, mythological killer.
But look at the actual text of the myth. Alcestis is the ultimate victim of intimate betrayal. Her husband literally fed her to the wolves to save his own skin.
Her silence isn't a boast. It's a profound condemnation.
If Alicia's Alcestis, then Gabriel, the handsome, supposedly devoted fashion photographer husband, is Admetus.
The painting implies that Gabriel sacrificed Alicia.
But how is that possible? Gabriel is the one found tied to a chair with his face blown off. It is a staggering paradox.
And the codes hidden in her artwork go much deeper than mythological titles.
Let's examine a piece she painted long before the murder, the car crash.
When Alicia was a child, she was in a severe traumatic car accident that killed her mother.
Her gallery manager, Jean-Felix, shows Theo a painting Alicia completed depicting this childhood trauma.
At first glance, it is a masterclass in photorealistic grief. You see the wrecked car, the mother slumped lifelessly at the steering wheel, and her spirit rising from the wreckage in the form of a bright yellow bird.
It seems like a straightforward, albeit tragic, piece of emotional processing.
But Jean-Felix points out a detail in the extreme background that completely changes the pathology of the painting.
In the corner of the canvas, almost out of focus, there is a small table. On the table sits a bowl of fruit. Bright, healthy red apples.
But if you step closer to the canvas, you see that crawling all over the skin of those bright red apples are dozens of small, white, slimy maggots.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the inclusion of maggots on fresh fruit is a classic element of the Venetian style of still life painting.
Right, a genre designed to remind the viewer of the inevitability of death and decay.
But in forensic psychology, analyzing patient artwork under this lens reveals a specific, agonizing paranoia. The maggots represent a deep systemic rot.
They symbolize something foul and consuming that is actively eating away at the core of what appears beautiful, healthy, and domestic on the surface.
It's a profound statement about her childhood trauma, yes, but it is also a desperate, bleeding warning about her present reality with Gabriel.
The marriage looks like a bright red apple, but it is infested.
Yeah.
I look at forensic art analysis, like taking a psychological crime scene and photographing it under UV light.
That's a great way to put it.
To the naked eye of the casual gallery observer, it's just a sad painting of a car crash. But under the black light of psychoanalysis, the bloodstains and the rot illuminate.
And the most terrifying hidden detail of all isn't in the car crash painting. It's in the Alcestis portrait.
Theo visits the gallery to view Alcestis in person, trying to unlock the puzzle. He stands in front of the massive canvas, staring into the oppressive, dark background behind Alicia's naked, scarred figure.
Jean-Felix stands next to it and casually remarks that the painting is fundamentally about a mystery, an artist's refusal to comment.
But Theo ignores him. He squints. He forces his eyes to stop looking at Alicia and instead focuses entirely on the negative space in the darkest shadows of the studio.
And as his eyes adjust, the darkness coalesces.
It's like one of those magic eye posters. The shadows aren't just empty space. The negative space forms a highly specific three-dimensional shape.
It's the distinct figure of a man standing completely concealed in the dark, watching her, spying on her from the shadows.
When you discover a detail like that in patient art, you have to ask a terrifying question. Did Alicia paint this stalker consciously?
Was she leaving a deliberate breadcrumb trail for an investigator to find? Like a desperate hostage blinking Morse code?
Or was her conscious mind so paralyzed by fear that her subconscious hijacked her hands, screaming for help through the brushstrokes without her even realizing what she was rendering?
It goes right back to your point about borderline personality traits. The line between calculated manipulation and uncontrolled emotional flooding is razor thin.
But if we are debating Alicia's level of conscious agency, we get a very violent, very clear answer in the clinical logs from the Grove.
Alicia is not a passive, wilting flower waiting to be rescued by Theo.
No. There is another patient on her ward named Elif. Elif is deeply disturbed, but more importantly, she is highly malicious and antagonistic.
Elise zeroes in on Alicia's silence and uses it as a target. She repeatedly taunts Alicia in the common areas.
She leans in close and whispers horrifying questions about what Gabriel's ruined, brain-splattered face looked like after the gun went off.
She cruelly mocks Theo's obvious, desperate affection for Alicia.
And Alicia's response proves she has tactical capabilities. She doesn't cower. She doesn't retreat into a catatonic state.
During an art therapy session, while Elif is taunting her, Alicia acts with lethal precision.
She takes a jagged, snapped paintbrush, lunges across the table, and plunges it directly into Elif's eye.
It is a visceral, horrifying escalation of violence.
But forensically, it tells us everything we need to know about her agency. Her art tools, the paint, the canvas, the brush, are literally her weapons.
She uses them to defend herself, to attack her enemies, and to communicate her rage.
Her silence isn't a symptom of weakness or a completely broken machine. Her silence is a loaded gun.
Precisely. And that calculated violence confirms something critical about the Alcestis painting.
The shadow man hiding in the dark background was not a metaphor for her clinical depression or her looming grief.
He was a flesh and blood stalker. The clinical files include Alicia's private diary, which she eventually hands over to Theo after this violent stabbing incident.
In the diary, she explicitly details a man watching her house from the park across the street.
She describes a man standing perfectly still in the shadows of the trees. A man who eventually escalates his obsession and breaks into her home.
And this is where we hit the narrative epicenter of the entire case file.
The twist that drops the floor out from under everything we have discussed.
If you, listening to this, thought Theo Faber was the deeply flawed but ultimately noble hero trying to piece together a tragedy and cure a traumatized woman,
You have been completely deceived.
because Theo Faber, the psychotherapist, the man writing the clinical logs, the man analyzing the art, the man sitting across from Alicia radiating empathy.
Theo is the stalker. He is the man in the park. He's the man who broke into her house. Theo Faber is the shadow man in the painting.
The sheer audacity and psychological manipulation of his clinical logs is staggering.
He manipulated the entire architecture of the case file. Remember the timeline we established.
The records present Theo's discovery of Kathy's affair, his emotional breakdown on the floor, and his therapeutic treatment of Alicia at the Grove as happening concurrently.
As an investigator or a reader of these files, you assume a linear chronological progression. Event A leads to event B.
Because we are conditioned to trust the clinical, authoritative voice of a medical professional, Theo is the one holding the clipboard.
He's the doctor using terms like countertransference and nameless dread.
But look closely at what he actually wrote. In reality, Theo's discovery of the affair, his descent into madness, and his subsequent stalking of the man his wife is sleeping with, a man he discovers is Gabriel Berenson.
Happens months before the murder.
His employment at the Grove, where he meets the silent, traumatized Alicia, happens years after the murder.
He weaponizes our inherent trust in the structure of a medical diary. He strategically omits the connective tissue of chronological time.
He writes, "I wanted to fix her, and Alicia needed help." He never technically lies about his emotional state. He was desperate.
But he completely conceals the fact that he is investigating the aftermath of his own crime.
He isn't trying to cure her to save her soul. He is trying to cure her to find out if she remembers him.
Think about the absolute psychopathy required to sit in a room with a woman whose life you destroyed, pretending to be her savior.
It forces a total, chilling reevaluation of every single interaction they have on the ward.
Let's go back to the moment Alicia finally hands Theo her private diary.
Throughout his clinical notes, Theo portrays this moment as a monumental therapeutic breakthrough. He writes about it as a profound sign of trust, proof that his methods are working.
But when you understand the true timeline, you realize she isn't handing him a breakthrough. She is handing him his own indictment.
She knows exactly who he is.
There's a scene shortly after the diary handoff where Alicia finally breaks her silence and speaks to Theo for the first time.
She sits in his office and tells him the story of the night of the break-in, but she tells him a fabricated version.
She looks him dead in the eye and describes an intruder who breaks in, executes Gabriel immediately, and flees into the night.
It is a masterful, cold-blooded test. She is lying to see how the doctor reacts.
And in her final hidden diary entry, she notes the exact physiological changes in Theo's face as she tells the lie.
She sees the micro-expressions of panic. She recognizes the specific shape of his eyes from the ski mask he wore that night.
She recognizes the lingering smell of his specific brand of smoke and his aftershave from the night he pressed a knife against her throat.
She knows her therapist is her tormentor.
Which brings us to the agonizing core of the tragedy. Why did Theo break in?
If we trace his psychological motives back to his own trauma, Theo did not go to the Berenson house on that sweltering August night with the intention of committing physical murder.
He didn't bring a gun. He went there to inflict the truth.
He wanted to expose Gabriel Berenson as a cheating, manipulative coward.
He wanted to violently shatter the pristine illusion of Gabriel and Alicia's perfect marriage, just as the illusion of his own marriage had been shattered by those emails.
He wanted Alicia to feel the exact same agonizing, uncontainable betrayal that was burning inside him.
But psychological warfare is wildly unpredictable, and it has a terrifying way of escalating into physical slaughter.
Let's reconstruct the actual anatomy of this psychic murder. It's the night of the crime. The heat is oppressive.
Theo breaks in through a window. He ambushes Alicia, terrorizes her, and ties her to a chair using heavy picture-hanging wire.
When Gabriel finally comes home, Theo ambushes him in the dark, knocks him unconscious, and ties him to a chair back-to-back with his wife.
But Theo doesn't just shoot Gabriel. He initiates a deeply sadistic psychological game.
He finds Gabriel's gun in the house, he points the weapon directly at Gabriel's head, and he tells Gabriel he has a choice. A twisted game of Russian roulette.
Gabriel can choose to die, or he can choose for Alicia to die in his place. Theo begins to count down from 10.
And this ultimatum is where the psychological concept of psychic infanticide becomes the fatal spark that detonates the entire room.
Gabriel wakes up bound in the dark. He is weeping, he is utterly terrified. And when forced to choose, he makes his decision.
He cries out, "I don't want to die." He explicitly offers his wife's life to the masked intruder to save his own skin.
He throws Alcestis to the wolves.
What Gabriel doesn't realize in his cowardice, and what Theo couldn't possibly have known when he designed this cruel test, is that Gabriel's choice triggers a catastrophic neurological loop in Alicia.
It triggers a massive repetition compulsion.
We have to explain this because it's the key to the entire bloodshed. Earlier in the psychiatric files, we learned the dark, hidden secret of Alicia's childhood.
Shortly after her mother died in that horrific car crash, Alicia was inside the house.
Her grieving, drunken father stood out in the garden, looked up at the sky, and screamed at the top of his lungs that he wished Alicia had died in the crash instead of her mother.
Alicia overheard it. She later told her cousin, "Dad just killed me."
Her father committed psychic infanticide. He didn't lay a hand on her physically, but he murdered her soul. He obliterated her fundamental right to exist.
She buried that world-ending trauma deep in her subconscious for decades.
Repetition compulsion is the brain's desperate subconscious drive to recreate the dynamics of an unhealed trauma in a misguided attempt to finally master it.
When Alicia is bound to that chair in the sweltering heat, listening to the man she loves most in the world, her husband, her protector, do the exact same thing her father did, the loop closes.
Gabriel chooses his life over hers. He wishes her dead.
Gabriel didn't pull the trigger of the physical gun, but he murdered Alicia's soul all over again.
The betrayal is absolute, and it perfectly mirrors the original uncontained dread of her childhood. It is a trauma too massive for her brain's architecture to hold.
Seeing the utter devastation he has caused, Theo feels he has achieved his goal. He fires the gun harmlessly into the ceiling to terrify them one last time.
He cuts Alicia loose, drops the gun on the floorboards, and casually walks out into the hot night air. He leaves Gabriel alive, assuming the marriage is over.
Theo was essentially a psychological arsonist. He poured the gasoline by exposing the infidelity and forcing the impossible ultimatum.
But Gabriel's cowardice and Alicia's unhealed childhood trauma provided the spark and the powder keg.
The moment Theo leaves the house, Alicia unties her own legs. She picks up the heavy gun from the floor.
And in a state of complete dissociated psychic shatter, her engine entirely flooded, she walks over to her bound husband.
And she shoots him 5 times directly in the face.
The forensic details of those shots are deeply significant. She doesn't shoot him in the chest. She targets the face.
She violently, methodically obliterates the identity of the man who just murdered her soul.
It raises a profound question about the nature of guilt. Is Theo legally culpable for murder here? He didn't pull the trigger.
Did he simply expose a fatal, pre-existing rot in their marriage? The maggots on the apple that was always going to consume them eventually?
From a purely legal standpoint, Theo is undeniably culpable for breaking and entering, aggravated assault, kidnapping, and severe reckless endangerment.
Which in many jurisdictions would comfortably meet the criteria for felony murder or manslaughter, given that his felonies directly resulted in a homicide.
But psychologically speaking, he is the ultimate catalyst.
He took an incredibly fragile, traumatized psychological system and applied maximum unbearable pressure until it violently ruptured.
But what makes Theo Faber truly a monster is not just the sadistic game he played on the night of the murder.
It is the cold, calculated clinical cover-up he executes years later.
This is the ultimate, sickening betrayal of the medical profession. When Theo realizes that Alicia has recognized him on the ward,
when he realizes that the diary she handed him contains the physical proof of his crimes, he doesn't experience a moment of remorse. He doesn't confess.
He uses the absolute power of his medical authority to permanently silence his victim. He walks into her private room in the intensive care ward, utilizing the unrestricted access granted to him as her primary caregiver.
While she is entirely under his protection, he takes a syringe and injects her with a massive lethal dose of pure morphine.
And he stages the scene with terrifying clinical precision. He leaves a tiny, almost invisible pinprick on her already heavily scarred wrist, knowing the forensic team will assume it's just another mark of her self-harm.
He frames it to look like a desperate suicidal overdose, using pills she supposedly hoarded.
He even goes so far as to manipulate the ward environment, framing his corrupt, negligent colleague, Christian, for leaving the drug cabinet unlocked.
Theo believes he has executed the perfect crime. He believes he has won. He even secures a major career promotion in the aftermath.
He walks away, leaving Alicia permanently silenced, trapped in a deep, chemically induced coma from which she will never wake.
He hides his own psychopathy behind the convenient clinical guise of a tragic, severely mentally ill woman who finally succumbed to her dark demons.
It is the absolute perversion of the therapeutic relationship. The very concept of containment we discussed earlier is weaponized.
He literally extinguishes the consciousness of the desperate patient he swore an oath to heal, simply to protect his own fabricated, fragile reality.
But for all his clinical brilliance and timeline manipulation, Theo Faber makes one fatal, arrogant miscalculation.
He severely underestimates the permanence of the written word.
When he searched her room, he didn't find the very final pages of her diary. He didn't know that just moments before he injected her, as she realized what he was about to do.
She frantically rushed to write down the absolute truth of his identity and hide the pages inside a canvas in her art portfolio before the drugs took hold of her nervous system.
Which brings us to the chilling conclusion of this case file. The human mind will build incredibly elaborate, impenetrable fortresses to avoid facing the agonizing pain of being unloved or betrayed.
Both Alicia and Theo built those massive fortresses.
Theo constructed his out of clinical detachment, medical authority, and timeline deception.
And Alicia built hers out of violent art and impenetrable silence.
But ultimately, the undeniable truth breached both of their walls.
It did.
And that leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling thought to mull over as we close these files. We usually think of silence as an absence, don't we?
We think of it as a lack of communication, a void, a flooded engine, a black hole that provides no light.
But consider Alicia Berenson's final tragic state. She is locked in a chemically induced coma in a sterile hospital bed. She is permanently, physically silenced by her abuser.
Her vocal cords are literally paralyzed. She will never speak another word as long as her body remains alive.
And yet, her diary survived. The hidden pages were found. The truth survived the silence.
It always does.
So as you go about your day listening to the conversations around you, I want you to think about this. Is true silence ever actually possible?
Or will uncontained trauma always find a medium, be it wet, dripping paint on a blank canvas, frantic words scribbled on hidden paper, or the undeniable forensic prick of a needle on scarred flesh?
To finally scream its truth to the world.